Xbox developer talks PlayStation 5 and accidentally shuts down one of its main hype factors. Let's get into it. What is going on, guys? Dealer back again talking about the next generation of gaming coming sooner than you might think. Actually, we all know it's already coming this fall. Yeah, that's pretty widely available information. I was lying. Here's the deal. Scorn developer has quite a bit to say on not only Xbox Series X. That Scorn developer.
Hey man,
you sure about this? I got some of these umbilical cords. If you're this thirsty, man, I could get you a Gatorade.
No, man,
this is really weird, bro. Like, seriously weird.
Yeah. Come on.
All right, here it goes. Well, okay, this feels kind of good. Look, I know it's not Halo. I know it's not Gears of War. I know it's not Batman, it's not Cyberpunk, it's not even, I don't know, Ninja Turtles. I don't know what this is. But what we do know about this is that it is a next generation game, meaning it is not going to be available on your Xbox One or PS4. The developers of this game have decided that they need not only umbilical cord slurping action, but next generation capability. And I know I'm gonna have a ton of people that are triggered in the comments about the title and the angle that I've gone for here because, hey, it's true. The developer does focus on CPU power rather than that SSD, particularly the SSD of the PlayStation 5, seeing as so many are holding this thing up to the sky and yelling weird chants at it, hoping that it saves the performance delta, that it closes the gap, which it will not, obviously. Look, as I've said over and over, they're both going to be monsters. I'm getting PS5 day one. I'm really excited to get Xbox Series X day one. It is what it is. When it comes down to it, another developer is saying, no, it's not about the SSD. After all, it doesn't have extra processing power. It's about CPU, GPU, primarily CPU in this developer's case, and I wanted to talk about it. So again, let's get into that information. Now they will get into why CPU is the big leap, not SSD for next generation games, but they do start out by saying we don't want to make any compromises, and Series X certainly enables us to do that. Now the cool thing about this upcoming generation is for the first time ever, you really don't have to compromise in any one area. You don't have to even make statements like this because both consoles do have solid state drives. You don't have to choose one or the other for Zen 2 CPU cores or a bunch of RAM or a ton of GPU power. And there just is a difference between the two, and they have the following to say. IGN asked a Scorn developer what their main goal was when bringing it to console for the first time ever. They said, put simply, we wanted to bring it in line with the PC version. The Xbox Series X allows us not to make any compromises with the title. When asked about the hardware itself, the developer said it's mostly evolutionary changes that are going to bring about the biggest difference for in-game performance and graphics. The most important of which being the elimination of that CPU bottleneck brought about by those Jaguar cores. Remember, Jag cores were so slow that it didn't matter if the GPU was running at 720p, idling at 720p, the CPU could not hand the GPU the frames fast enough to get up past 45 to 50 frames per second in most cases, so they would simply lock those frame rates down at 30. Worse yet, when explosions, physics, and detail were on screen, that CPU overhead was made even more unstable. Frame rate drops on many 60 FPS games were definitely common. This is why even Xbox One X with its 6 teraflops often did not have a 60 FPS mode. GPU is there and willing, but bottlenecked by that Jaguar CPU core. They also say the much faster loading of assets thanks to the SSD was beneficial as well, due to the fact that it's all about responsiveness and not having to wait on things. Now, when speaking specifically about the PS5 Unreal Engine 5 tech demo running on an actual PS5 development kit, he has the following to say. If developers decided to opt out for lower resolutions and 30 FPS, they could get spectacular results like those seen on the PS5, like the one seen in the new Unreal Engine 5 showcase a few days ago. He says what you have to remember is that responsiveness and motion clarity are also part of the overall presentation, so you would still actually be losing detail in a sense. Remember, he is focusing on the CPU and overall responsiveness of the game, the performance of the game, not the SSD. And while talking about PlayStation 5, he talks about how they could opt for a lower frame rate at 30 FPS while at a lower resolution. To them, this is their problem with PS5's tech demo running at 30 FPS, or even a low resolution is not something they want to do. They know what the real next generation leap is, that frame rate, those physics, particles, animations, more. They reference the Series X SSD as in helping them move assets a bit quicker, but it does not improve GPU and CPU performance. Provided there is no bottleneck, you do not get a performance gain from a storage solution. That is simply how it is. However, if you are building a game and PS5's pretty quick SSD is your lowest common denominator, meaning it is your baseline metric for game design, then yes, you may be able to change the way your game is built. But if that game runs on PC, like Scorn does, and happens to run on a 7200 RPM hard drive, a SATA-driven SSD, which isn't even a fraction of as fast as an Xbox Series X SSD, or even an Xbox Series X SSD, which is not as quick as a PS5 SSD, then you are bottlenecked by that lowest common denominator. You will never be able to change that gameplay design. You will never be able to unlock those newer possibilities. On the other hand, extra GPU power, CPU power, memory bandwidth, and more does scale universally, provided optimization and effort is applied through x86 architecture. So it's simple. Any third-party game that runs on PC or any other system and does not have a baseline requirement of a 5 GB per second SSD will never leverage PS5's SSD. This has actually upset many because they think the PlayStation 5's SSD is the end-all be-all and actually something that generates in-game performance like a graphics card does, or a CPU if of course bound by that CPU. In reality, hey, that's not how it works, and for PlayStation 5 to get its CPU up to 3.5 GHz, remember, it has to then downclock its GPU, as already confirmed by Sony, to upclock that CPU, and that is due to power and heat management. There's no getting around it. It is a dynamic seesaw system that they have developed to enable developers to get more teraflops out of the GPU while the CPU demands are at their lowest point, being the beginning of the generation. As the generation progresses, they will need more and more CPU overhead, and to get that CPU up over 3 GHz and up to 3.5 GHz, its maximum. Meanwhile, its competitor is at over 12 teraflops and 3.8 GHz on the CPU, 3.6 with 16 threads. Those are locked numbers no matter what. Talk about efficiency. But when it comes down to it, this developer says the real leap for these next generation systems is the CPU, even going into detail on how frame rate improves the fidelity of the game, or rather, you are losing fidelity and information in a sense if you do not have a higher frame rate title. And you know what? I have to agree with him. Every single game should have a 60 FPS option on Series X. If not, one of the biggest reasons, one of the biggest lures to the new console has been lost, and that is not acceptable. There's just too much performance on the table here with this system. Again, this isn't exactly what some people out there want to hear. I've seen articles and people that are upset about this, but when it comes down to it, this developer is correct. The real leap here is in the CPU, and because they have so much GPU performance left over, they are able to do things at extremely high resolutions with a ton of high-end effects at higher than 30 FPS frame rates, meaning 60 and above. Let me know your thoughts down below. This developer claims that the footage you saw at the next-gen gameplay showcase is about 80% different now than it was then, meaning it has improved. It'll be very curious to see what happens there. I know the game is extremely weird, but when it comes down to it, it will be doing some interesting things and pushing the physics and frame rate higher than some other games. Again, let me know your thoughts. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. Maybe show a buddy or two, and of course, subscribe for more. No matter what you're into, no matter what you love to play, it all gets better, as I've said before, in 2020. I'm Dealer. I'm out.